Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for joining the next episode of Nic of Time. Sorry for the delay. We had a little bit of issues with StreamYard today. Not sure what's going on with the latest software update. Wasn't working on Chrome and wasn't working on Edge, so took a little while, but we're here. So thanks for joining. So many people waiting. Sorry for the 10-minute delay. So today we have an amazing guest. Rob Vietmeyer is joining us, the second DoD Chief Software Officer. Maybe the best. We'll see. We'll talk about that today. Maybe not the best of all of DoD because, I was number one after all. So, there's that to beat. With that, remember to subscribe at the nicofTime.tv, register for the emailing. Wanted to give you a quick background on Rob. Rob is now the DoD Chief Software Officer for the Deputy Chief Information Officer for Information Enterprise. Is responsible for driving implementation and evolution of the department software modernization strategy. Rob has an amazing background. In fact, I had pushed his name to become the next Air Force and Space Force Chief Software Officer, but the Air Force moved too slow. After a year, DoD CIO was smart enough to promote him to become the CSO after Jason Weiss left the DoD. He's obviously responsible for advocating for the latest software approaches. He's been a great partner of the industry when it comes to DevSecOps and cloud services adoption in the department. He collaborates with all the DoD components, government, industry, academia, to bring to DoD DevSecOps practices, agile software development, and cloud native modernization. Before that, Rob served as the Director of Cloud and Software Modernization for the same Deputy CIO of IE, where he led that team to really modernize the way DoD develops software, played a key role in the DevSecOps guidance. I would say actually was probably some of the most important pillar of the adoption of DevSecOps in the department. And he brought also this OCONUS cloud strategy to life and the cloud infrastructure as code implementation. Lots to talk about today. So let's bring Rob to the show since we're a little late already. Welcome.
Yeah. Hi, Nic. Thanks.
Good to have you. So sorry for the little hiccup here at the beginning, but we'll catch up and be able to cover all these amazing topics we have to talk about. We're lucky to have you, someone with your background and kind of your access to the latest and brightest both people and concepts in the department is so essential to be able to move at a pace of all of them. So we'll talk about so many different topics today. But before we do that, we always give the guests a chance to give us a little bit about their journey. So over to you for that.
Yeah, thanks. And I'm coming to the group here. I'm actually took leave this week. We're touring colleges in the South with my son, who's a senior. So I'm at Clemson University right now and been having a great time. Let's see. So my journey. So after Nic gave that wonderful introduction, I'll start off by saying I got into software almost by chance. I had started out of school in financial services. I had wanted to be in aerospace, but there were no aerospace jobs at the time. Got really bored with the financial services side of things. And I had a college friend who had once told me, Rob, you need to get out of engineering. You need to go into computer engineering. And because computers are going to be the next big thing. So I said, okay, why don't I try it? I found a job opportunity at DISA. It was coding and maintaining a small mini computer and doing some support functions for DISA. It was in Unix. I'd never done Unix before, but I said, okay, how hard can it be? I'll just learn it. So got that job. And so that was my start on the software and had several software jobs, smaller ones. At one point, DISA was looking to redo their acquisition career management system. And I saw how much they wanted to pay the contractors to develop a new system. And I said, hey, boss, I could probably write this in about 6 weeks if that made sense. And so they said, here you go. I probably should have taken the other tact and jumped to the commercial side and taken the money. But so I rewrote, modernized, and made it web-enabled DISA's acquisition career management system and other things. So a few jobs. I think one of the ones that really put me on the journey that I'm on now is the engineering work I was doing for the Global Command and Control System, and then later led the implementation and delivery of the Global Combat Support System. So as we were doing GEECS, the Global Command and Control System, there was one event, we would do these major block releases. And so we were coming up with our 4.0 block release. And there were about 300 to 400 software items that made up this delivery. And the goal was everybody had to, all the different contractors had to deliver by October. And then we were going to do 6 months of integration testing and DT testing to get it ready for OT and eventual deployment. Of course, that 6 months turned into, I think, over 18 months, probably closer to 2 years. This block release was 4.0. We actually ended up fielding, there was 4.1, 4.2, which were the joint operation planning system and our ops and maintenance systems, operational readiness system, sorry. We actually ended up fielding those first because that integration challenge of all these different items, just one problem would lead to the next, and then you getting the developers to fix it, and it was this cascading, set of issues. So what I learned from that experience directly was that this waterfall model, these big block releases on these large complex systems is not going to work, and so I switched my focus and started focusing on agile development and bringing agile practices into the department. So I ended up running a series of conferences with some commercial partners to bring agile concepts into the department, worked with the Defense Science Board and the Hill to bring legislative push to DoD to adopt agile practices, and then created Forge.mil, which was, I think, one of the first SaaS, government-delivered SaaS services. So that was a really collaborative development environment. And then along the way, working a lot of the different cloud initiatives in the department. So always been trying to be on the front edge of how do we accelerate the department moving forward.
Yeah, that's quite the career. We're kind of lucky that you decided to stick it to the government side and make them a little bit later, So
I'm still waiting for that event, but I
that's
think
okay. You give it another 3 years. We need you a little bit
yeah.
longer, so
Well, the
we
great thing
can't have
about
everybody good leaving.
I don't have any complaints, right? The government experience has been awesome. The opportunities I had along the way and the impact that you can have, it's really exciting being on the government side. So I wouldn't have traded anything.
Good.
Yeah.
So, let's get started first. Obviously you have a pretty vast background on the adoption of not just cloud, but like you said, kind of this movement from, waterfall to agile. I would argue still to this day, probably a good chunk of DoD still does not really understand agile. I remember several people telling me, if you move fast, you're going to trip and then you're going to fall down and you're not going to be able to stand back up.
Yeah.
And so that kind of meets the point of like small incremental delivery of value and making sure you're not floating down to the point you're actually hurting yourself where you can't stand back up.
Yeah.
And so really kind of this training of agility and this kind of background on agile really is probably the biggest impediment to the success of DoD as a whole. But you've seen kind of the cloud perspectives change, right? You said the great work you guys have done, bringing the first SaaS service, right, all the way to MilCloud 1.0, 2.0, now JWCC, bringing kind of commercial capabilities at scale, working on OCONUS stuff, right? So how much do you feel like cloud perspectives have changed since 2004, and what's different?
Since the early days of the cloud, it's almost completely different. When we started on the cloud approach, and I was part of the team that put together what was called at the time the Rapid Access Compute Environment, or RACE. It was DISA's first attempt at delivering a government cloud. the predecessor to MilCloud 1 and then 2. And at the time, when we were looking at the commercial environments, the understanding in the department was that that's too risky. We're never going to put our compute into off premises, into commercial environments. I think at the time there was some founded concerns that this was back in the noisy neighbors era of cloud, which was when if your performance was being hit and it wasn't your processing, that meant you had a noisy neighbor in the cloud that was hammering the same machines that you were on. And so the guidance was tear down and rebuild and hope you come up in a better neighborhood. I mean, that literally was the guidance at the time. And so we didn't have the separations, the stronger separations between tenants, if even workload utilization was having an impact. And I think that since that time, the cloud vendors have and continue to make tremendous improvements in separating one tenant from another, to preventing side channel attacks, to really putting in place a robust architecture that you can rely upon. And I think with, as you mentioned, Nick, on our journey on Agile and cloud, it's sort of the same thing. It's I agree with you. We still have a lot of waterfall. And Agile is, and DevSecOps is a huge change from how we have done things. We are seeing the cutting edge programs moving forward, but we still have a lot of work to do in bringing, I think, the majority of DoD programs, making Agile and DevSecOps the default. We are not close to that yet. And I think the same thing with the cloud. The department's cloud adoption right now is, I think, compared to industry, on the lower side. We're continuing to work with the mil devs and the components to accelerate and put in place components to help people move in and adopt the cloud where it makes sense, right? So, through this journey, we've gone from, cloud first to cloud smart, and learning along the way, where does cloud fit? And I think that for the most part, we're looking, our advanced or more modern compute is absolutely needs to be in the cloud. The vendors are delivering just unbelievable advanced services in AI, in zero trust, in cloud security that we need to be take advantage of as a department, and link that with the DevSecOps. One of the things that we've learned along this journey is that the cloud is always changing, and if you're in a waterfall approach, those changes are going to be difficult to deal with. And so we're finding that to really enable that cloud journey, that DevSecOps and Agile has to be a critical piece of that as your infrastructure moves forward.
Yeah, that's right. And I guess back to that, right? You also saw kind of the shift between the MilCloud first engagement, right? And obviously there was MilCloud 1 and then MilCloud 2, and then I was talking to someone, I'm not gonna give names, but a pretty important CIO, and he was saying this and DoD told me to move all my stuff to MilCloud 2.0, and then when I finally did it, they told me now I had to move off of it because now we're moving to the commercial stuff. So that was interesting. What obviously now we're trying to leverage commercial providers. When all this stuff started, also with GovCloud, right? The goal was to try to keep parity, and when this started, obviously you had storage and compute, and that was pretty much the extent of cloud. Now you have all these services, AI. I was talking to someone, asking me, why don't we have OpenAI on the top secret fabric? Well, it costs $100 million to host, allegedly. So who is going to foot that bill? How do you keep up with GPUs and the hardware used and all the updates, right, of the services and accreditation of the services? So I guess when you've seen what happened with MilCloud, and then now the government regions and the commercial regions getting FedRAMPed, what did you find worked and what didn't, and what's the path forward?
Yeah, and on the MilCloud journey, as I mentioned, cloud is always changing, even in the commercial space. So I think the movement from MilCloud to Stratus, this actually moved. I forget the actual number of workloads, but there were everyone that was in MilCloud 2 moved into Stratus over a couple of months. I didn't think they were going to be able to pull it off, but without a major impact, being able to move everybody into their new Stratus, which is the replacement for the MilCloud 2. And just looking, I think we're, in the Cloud Smart approach, what we're finding is the commercial clouds work really well for, and are really the only solution for your advanced computing as you're moving forward, and for the environments that are set up to run in a DevSecOps approach, and to be able to take advantage of the latest and greatest capabilities, whether they be security capabilities or they be new mission capabilities like AI and ML. But that still leaves a big footprint of DoD compute that is still in the virtual machine space, that is looking to take smaller steps. And I think that, Stratus and some of the on-prem clouds that we have actually fit a niche in the full compute landscape. To be able to do cloud-like, even if it's mostly virtual machines, but now moving into containers in that Stratus cloud, but give people the ability to migrate without re-engineering from where their current systems are, and to be in an environment, a robust on-premise environment that can support those systems. It makes sense. And then having the pure commercial solutions. So I think we're building out now a more complete landscape, cloud-based landscape across the department, and can tailor the solutions delivery. I see in the question, one of the GovCloud regions. So right now we do have a preference for the GovCloud regions over the commercial cloud regions. We've built in, at least at the networking level, in our connections into those regions. There has been talk about moving into the more commercial space. I know the vendors are looking at those GovCloud regions as expensive for them to operate and maintain, and looking for more complete solutions, especially as we start to incorporate more advanced zero trust and tenant separations within the commercial regions. I think that makes sense to me. I will tell the story. Those GovCloud regions were originally created out of there was a few meetings at the White House with OMB. There was concerns raised by the inspector generals of several agencies. It turns out it wasn't even cloud per se. It was when DoD compute was moving into commercial data centers, the inspector generals were finding that they no longer had access as seamlessly as they did when there was a DoD data center or a federal data center. So they would show up the data center door and say, I need to pull data off of my agency servers. And of course, no commercial data center is going to let anyone just walk in. And so this was creating barriers to the IG. And it was a data center perspective. Now, when we shared, hey, guess what? Even if it were cloud and you showed up, it wouldn't matter if they let you in the door, because all of the tools you're using aren't going to work in the cloud environment. You're going to have to deal with the APIs and deal remote, because of being in the physical location doesn't help you if you're trying to pull data out of the cloud. And so, unfortunately, most of the people involved in these discussions at the time, these early days of cloud, were not technologists. They were inspector generals, a lot of acquisition, a lot of senior leadership, and not completely unfounded, but there was this fear that if we didn't have a government cloud region, that would be way too risky for the department. And the hope that if we had GovCloud regions, it could enable our IGs and others to perform their missions more successfully. I think it was a little short-sighted was my opinion at the time, but that's what drove those GovCloud regions. They still exist today, and we do have gained some additional security out of for the department. It's not necessarily the U.S. persons, but the network security layer. And as we move forward, I think what we're finding is that the investment really is going to be in the major investment in those commercial clouds, and need to be able to figure out how to better leverage those as a department as we move forward.
And what's interesting, right, is obviously everybody has their own take on the gov versus commercial region, right? The fact is the cost is about 30% at least, more expensive. So there's definitely an issue there, but more importantly, the parity is not there, right? And so for me, for example, when I moved from the commercial regions to the government region, for our Sage, we realized, hey, that a lot of the cyber products we're using were not there, and so effectively, for something that's supposed to make us more secure, one might argue losing those cyber capabilities makes you less secure. If you look at Kubernetes with AKS, you look at Microsoft Defender, there's a lot of additional features that are not accessible yet, despite being 2 to 3 years old, by the way, on the commercial side, not recent stuff. So obviously the parity has been kind of the primary issue, right? We're spending a pretty big fortune, right, between Amazon and Azure on create, and they're spending a ton of money too as vendors, right, to do this. What do you think is the answer when it comes to parity? Can we even, when you look at stuff like OpenAI, $100 million to host the GPUs, are we even going to be able to do that, or what's the future look like when it comes to parity, I guess?
Yeah, well, so I think parity, if it means across the classification domains, so moving parity in unclass to classified to secret to top secret. The challenges we've seen in terms of maintaining parity are really twofold. One is that many of the commercial services actually rely upon other foundational capabilities that only exist in the internet, and so that can slow that parity down from the vendor's perspective. So in the JWCC contract, we've tried to build in that requirement that the vendors maintain that parity and move those things up. But then we also have run into situations where the first one major one we ran into was a lot of the serverless compute that the vendors can deliver. Much of that relies upon public DNS services, which don't exist. Similar services didn't exist in our classified regions. So there was an engineering effort that they had to undertake to actually stub out some of those services to actually get the serverless capabilities to work in the classified environment. We run into that. We also run into the situation where, depending on the service, the department pays, or the federal government picks up part of the infrastructure bill for, at least at the networking, the connections, the defense of cyber across those connections. And so because of that, those services incur a lot of costs, there's can be a call on the part of the department or the federal government to say there's not much interest in those services right now, or at least not worth the investment that it would take to get there. So but the general rule is we should have parity from unclass all the way up to classified, with those two exceptions that we tend to work out with the vendors, which is the dependencies that don't exist in those environments. We'll work through that. Or if the demand is for a particular service is not high enough to warrant the cost that the department would have to invest to get it there. Those tend to be rare exceptions, but outside of that, we're the vendors have committed under JWCC to maintain that parity, and we're engaged to make sure that happens.
So, when you look at the contract, right, of JWCC, what I found out talking to Microsoft, in fact, when I started wondering about how to bring, OpenAI to the secret and top secret fabric, I realized that the vendors, when they responded to the bid of JWCC, they decided which services will be kind of part of that engagement. And so, effectively, what I found out is that the OpenAI and all the modern AI stuff is not part of the reciprocity of JWCC. So it's mostly focused on the common services and compute and storage and AKS and all this stuff where they committed to do that parity
Yeah.
engagement. So how do you see that moving forward? How do we revisit, right? There's going to be new things, and if we're effectively not telling people, hey, you have to keep parity on everything, well, obviously, we're going to get behind, and slowly but surely you're going to wake up 2 years from now and be like, oh, all of the critical stuff we need is not there.
Sure. So, and I was just chatting with, because when we chatted earlier, he had mentioned this concern. So I had a conversation with the JWCC program manager yesterday, Ryan MacArthur. And so he wanted me to make sure that everyone knows that we are not limiting. The contract is actually encourages the vendors to bring everything that's available within their environments forward as part of that parity. I'll say, so contractually the requirement is for their native services, and a lot of the things that folks are interested in are in the third-party marketplace that are supported within those cloud environments. So there's a difference contractually between their requirement to deliver their core AWS and Microsoft and Oracle and Google services and make sure there's parity across. That is a contractual requirement. Where they host marketplaces for third-party capabilities, we are doing everything we can on the department side to make sure that and put pressure on the vendors to bring those forward. It is within their responsibilities to do that. And so the JWCC program is engaged in trying to encourage the vendors to bring forward more and more of those third-party capabilities that exist within those marketplaces and make those available at the higher classification domains. Now within that, right, there is a cost for the vendors, so there's some economics come to play along with any of those concerns that I mentioned from is the foundation there to support it in the classified environments, and would it bring unplanned or currently not funded additional cybersecurity investments that the department would need to bring.
Yeah, that's interesting. So obviously we get that the government has a tough time, right, forcing the companies to do all this work, particularly for services that are not widely used, right? Because now that's a pretty big cost up front. If you look at AI, the consumption of AI is anecdotal in the department compared to other services, obviously. But now, because they're not there, then we can use it. So it's kind of this conundrum, right, where getting stuff accredited or getting stuff consumed obviously is not possible. So now less teams are going to be likely to use it, which compounds the problem when it comes to using new technologies, right? Because now no one is going to want to be the first to find a way to get accredited, or how do you even negotiate with Microsoft to say, well, it's time for us to get some AI stuff in there, if they don't have the consumption and they don't have the demand, or the demand needs to be so big that it's now funding the stuff. So what's the vision, I guess, when it comes to solving that? Because nothing you guys have said so far, I'm afraid, at least on the JWCC side, is really solving the problem. I mean, we all recognize the problem. I think by the way, the JWCC did a great job getting stuff done. And getting something done is better than not having anything. So that's awesome. Compared to Jedi, there's you can't even compare. So that's pretty exciting. So I don't want to criticize. I'm just saying what's next to really solve it, right?
Yeah, so let me, you mentioned the JWCC and what we've built in there. And a lot of it, the value is not necessarily the what you would see necessarily from the outside, right? So that vehicle, what people don't understand is the relationship that we now have with the vendors. Now, under JWCC, we have a direct contractual relationship with those vendors. That has not existed in the department, and that has slowed our advancement in ways that most people don't understand. So when you're working through a third party, if you're trying to figure out how do I do something new, how are we going to solve together some cybersecurity problems, how are we going to accelerate delivery of new capabilities working together. When you're acquiring the CSP services through an independent third party, that creates a lot of friction in those conversations. Especially when we didn't have a single major contract vehicle to really put the core infrastructure, the core enablers around from a cybersecurity, from a visibility and management of our cloud workloads, to how do we work together to accelerate delivery? How do we accelerate that parity? How do we have a direct conversation with our major vendors on which are the key services for the department, where are things moving, and how do we work together now in a much more seamless way? So I think that JWCC puts in place a foundation that we have not had that's going to enable us to really accelerate along those sets of concerns that you were just highlighting. I think what we're looking at is no one wants to slow anything down. We're trying to accelerate with these capabilities. We are learning along the way. So JWCC is a new vehicle. We are only executing the first task orders now. We are working out our relationship with our IC partners to work with them to combine efforts in ways that we haven't been able to in the past, to work together around those accelerations. So, and with our CDAO that's responsible for the AI environments, working with them to deploy those AI frameworks, to deploy the AI framework, the data frameworks that they've been working on, to get those as part of that core infrastructure that the department's building out now with JWCC. And so while we're, some early implementation, roadblocks or, crawl, walk, run, I'm really excited about where we are headed for that with JWCC, what is enabling us, the work that the DISA team is putting in place now to build that foundation for accelerating delivery, to engage with those vendors to improve our cybersecurity, to engage with those vendors to deliver the next generation types of capabilities. I think I see that foundation happening now, and so I'm excited about what we'll start to see come out of that in the next few months.
Yeah, so we're getting so many questions. People already have a lot of questions when it comes to cloud, right?
Yeah.
Even about JWCC, but also even the move from MilCloud. There was, I mean, I'm gonna have to filter. There's so many, but I'm gonna bring one or two because before we move on. Someone was asking also about the flattening. You mentioned the commercial regions. The APs cap, right? Obviously, people want to have visibility into traffic. That's
Yeah.
mostly a perimeter defense kind of concept. Which, by the way, despite being the pro, the most excited person about zero trust on the planet, the fact is having some of these capabilities still makes sense as long as it's implemented in a modern way and it doesn't become a bottleneck. But I do see the value of it, and I certainly believe that these capabilities should be integrated into the new construct, right? So obviously we can't talk about the classified stuff here, but when you think about kind of the flattening and potential use of commercial, do you find it to be, I mean, if you ask Microsoft and Amazon, they would would pay millions in lobbying to convince people to do this, right? Because it costs them a fortune. They can't meet parity. We're missing out on capabilities. If you look at Azure commercial, it's FedRAMP high, so why can't we use it, right? So what's the answer, you think, when it comes to starting to do some engagements? I mean, we're doing it now with Sage, trying to bring open AI into the, from the commercial, commercial FedRAMP high into the GovCloud Al5 enclave. So can that be a thing? Is that where the future has to go because we don't have a choice anyways?
Yeah, when we look at OpenAI and the impact it's having on the collective American psyche right now, as people are starting to realize what AI can be, even with a sort of a relatively simple, but at scale, it's pretty amazing on what that's enabling. The When we look at how do we streamline delivery, and you touched on a couple things like our existing networking infrastructure. We are peering the defense networks with the commercial providers networks, and in doing that, we still have to maintain our perimeter protection for the systems and services that exist on the defense network side of things. So our initial implementation is around the boundary cloud access points, right, which we're still running. So we have commercial meet points where we peer the defense network, DISN, Defense Information Network System, with the commercial providers. That is now running maybe by today's standards, a relatively clunky cybersecurity stack. But we are working with the DISA team on how do we replace that the BCAP security and move us to zero trust. DISA team has been working on the Thunderdome pilot that is now running into its production phases. I think they're at 1,600 users, and we're really looking at how do we implement SASE solutions, SD-WAN solutions for enabling this next generation connection to our commercial providers, being able to improve our ability to do command and control of the cloud network traffic that's coming, and to improve our security with at the internet boundary in this case. And so you will see planned implementations now for, and we're working with the MilDeps as well as this implementation, because we're looking at how do we modernize our regional networking securities to improve the flow from end to end. I will say, this is where we run into the challenge with these with the new technologies. Oftentimes, it takes significant change in what people call culture, right? So, the people, the processes, and the technology is needed to adapt to be able to effectively implement these types of solutions. So we are engaged now with the MilDeps and others on how do we make this transition to zero trust, to Thunderdome. How do we remove and optimize our network peering between us and the commercial providers? It is not easy, right? So I'll take one of the data centers. I would love to get rid of VPNs and replace them with SASE solutions like you developed with CNAP, and is now part of the DoD reference architecture, cybersecurity reference architecture, with SD-WAN replacements for BCAPs. So as we look at the VPN challenge in one of the environments that supports me in the day-to-day, of course that's what I'd like to fix first, because these clunky VPNs are still around. But when you get into that environment and you find out that there are 1 million+ firewall rules, and the documentation on those firewall rules on which ones you can turn off safely without causing impacts is not there. So being able to uncover and then transition from these legacy technologies into this future, we have a lot of technical debt that we have to overcome in doing that. And so it oftentimes is not as fast as we would like it, not as fast as I would like it, but we do run into some significant challenges.
Yeah. So this is so interesting. Obviously, not a simple solution, but a needed one. You would think probably the first service, right, that someone would want to bring on top of the JWCC cloud would be the security stack, right? So effectively, the way I think of it is, let's try to engage with the cloud providers to bring this capability as a native stack. So not because right now, right, the nightmare with the BCAP is that every engagement, right, we have to set it up, right? That should just be there, right? I just never understood. Well, we have to do this, right? It should just be there. I shouldn't have to do anything, right? And it's just like any cloud service, right? You should just be able to speed it up, and then you have it, but right now it's like the whole BCAP setup for a new team to use a cloud enclave is a nightmare, which is, part of what Cloud One brings as value, right? Is first, well, technically they bypassed it, so I'm not sure that's the answer,
Well,
because they want the IAP, right? So, but don't you think like JWCC should really be, providing this as a turnkey thing?
yeah, well, I think and I think those discussions are underway, and to look at the advanced capabilities that the vendors can bring now that they are on under the JWCC contract. So I'd say since contract award, I've been engaged in several conversations at the senior levels of the department on just how do we start to build out that more seamless but more mature defensive cyber capabilities, and so that is in the works. DISA is looking at how do we deliver those improvements, to enable both the more seamless delivery, but then optimize that's the cybersecurity and the network connections as we move forward. So that work's underway. We are also, talking at that next stage is how do we build out a more robust enterprise defensive cyber capability, able to monitor the application and data level telemetry that's coming off of new cloud native apps, serverless apps, and containerized, Kubernetes containerized apps. And that's really a new space for our defensive cyber operations folks. We tend to focus a lot of our defensive cyber data collection today on NetFlow data, on some of the boundaries, the firewall data. So whether it's a global enterprise networking boundary or at the networking enclave, we have today, that's where most of the data and telemetry is coming from. We also tend to, the defensive cyber teams tend to pull that data back out of the cloud for processing in their own premises with their own tools. Moving forward, as we start to collect the application and data level telemetry, there's just too much data. It doesn't make sense to try to pull that back to the environments. We need to at least pre-process much of that data in the cloud environment itself. And so we do have several of the CSSPs, our cyber defenders, that are building out piece parts, or learning how these new tools operate, the way that they can give them now a much greater ability to command and control across, from its defensive cyber perspective, across the networks than they have before. We learned that with our implementation of 365. We're building that out in these cloud environments today. I think the next step really is to say, should there be an enterprise foundation for defensive cyber that exists, to centralize all the telemetry collection and pre-processing, allow our cyber defenders to plug their tools in, but give at least a common foundation. From my perspective, it seems to make sense from both a cost perspective, as well as from bringing an enterprise U.S. Cyber Command view to what's happening into the environment. JWCC provides that foundation now. We'll have, through that contract, we have a single defense tenant, so we can be more successful in trying to deploy common solutions within that environment than we could be in the legacy environment where everyone tends to have their own cloud contract. So I'm really excited about the steps we're taking now and where we're going with that. It's one of these areas where we are never done, and you're always looking at what is that next best, the next piece of the solution that we can start to put in place. And JWCC has given us a great foundation to build that in.
Yeah. Before we move on, one more question,
Yep.
and let's try to keep it, short because I have so much more questions. Sorry. Chris is awesome. Chris has helped me a lot with a lot of accreditation issues, and he's just a great guy. So, hi, Chris. Many third-party SaaS providers use the term GovCloud when they really mean a commercial cloud dedicated to government, but not under the control of by ownership or contract by the government. How can we ensure language is used is clear moving forward to ensure that GovCloud means gov-owned and gov-dedicated cloud means a SaaS that a third party is dedicating to the service?
No, we have struggled with terminology, and it continues to change. This is a new one for me.
Yeah.
But
Do we even have I mean, I guess with MilCloud and stuff, is that, even when you look at how we contract stuff, right? Or,
yeah.
there's always a middleman somewhere. We never do the work. So isn't that always a prime or someone involved too? Even for MilCloud, there was a company involved. It was never really owned by, I mean, I guess it was owned,
Well,
right? But,
and to be fair, I think the term, the descriptor we tried to apply was on-premises cloud on that one.
Right.
So as we move from MilCloud to Stratus, DISA is the integrator and has much more control under the Stratus delivery than we had under MilCloud. MilCloud, while it was on-premise, it was primarily operated and delivered.
Right. It's managed by somebody.
Yeah, by a third party, right? And so with Stratus, we have more flexibility. I think the terminology is one of those challenges we'll have to continue to work on.
I don't even know if we're gonna have a cloud owned by the government in the future. You know what I mean? I don't know if that's the thing.
No, well, so Stratus, no one delivers anything from scratch, and so while DIS is acting as the integrator, there's a whole host of commercial products underneath that enable it to be delivered.
So I guess that's the closest, but that's probably going to be the only one. I don't think a bunch of them popping up is going to happen anytime soon. Maybe OCONUS stuff.
There'll be some of the OCONUS will be delivered. For the most part, operating a data center, operating a cloud infrastructure tends not to really be where you want to focus your spend. You want to say, as those become commodities, someone just go do it for me.
Let's pay someone that knows how to do it, right?
I want to take all the advanced tools and I want to deliver my mission apps, right? I don't want to, this, whether it's the cybersecurity, the networking, the data center ops, not many people want to focus on that piece of it. And so if we can find those solutions where we can enable that delivery for the department, that's where we're going to focus.
Right. Yeah. All right. So quickly, let's talk about OCONUS and Edge.
Yeah.
Still a struggle, right? Still a struggle. But people still think, sovereignty and all these issues. How do you bring it with you? On a mobile form factor and all that good stuff.
Yeah, I think the biggest effort that we have right now within the CIO on the Edge side is what we call the Joint Operational Edge. And what we're in a transition period now where most of the edge compute in the department has been done as, an organization has a need. They will bring the edge compute solutions out with them to support their mission needs. If you look at where we need to be in the future, we should have a global edge-to-edge that's delivered and supported by the enterprise. And so that if I am, say, an AI algorithm developer that's sitting here in the continental United States, I don't have to buy remote compute nodes and operate and manage those at each location I want to deploy to. Rather, we should have enterprise nodes that they can push compute out to those OCONUS locations, out to the edge environments. I think where we're looking right now in terms of from the CIO perspective, we see a what I'll call the expeditionary edge being delivered by the military departments. So think the lightweight, man-portable mount on a Humvee, mount on a vehicle types of compute, and that those will exist to support those unit operations, those mission operations. But we now have the ability, the vendors are delivering us larger form factors that can operate on DoD premises or operate, they're designed as on-premise solutions to extend the commercial cloud. So these solutions tend to be in form factors, several racks of compute to shipping containerized versions. And what we're looking at is the ability to extend our OCONUS-based regions much more seamlessly to give a much more resilient solution that's operating within the AOR for our military units. So provide more compute to extend that cloud. Most of the regional cloud capabilities is reached back today, and really take this next step in delivering the edge as we move forward.
Yeah, that's the way to go. I think it's always good good to have the plan on paper. No, I guess it's going to be fun to actually do the work.
Yeah, but, it's always fun, when the vendors say things like, and we're building it out on secret to begin with the Joint Staff and others as we put these first nodes in place. We're finding not all of these edge nodes want to operate in a multi-tenant way. They still kind of operate, tied to a single account. So we're working with vendors to make so these can be advertised. These node locations can be advertised as multi-tenant solutions to whomever might need to deploy, and to work the some of the in the secret environment. It's always fun when the vendors say, "Yeah, I want to bring my own network scanning tools because I got to make sure your network is appropriate. I can plug in, and then I want to take those network tools home with me." Most secret data centers don't like people running scanners inside and then removing them. So you start to run into all these sort of logistics things as you try to implement it. Our approach right now it's a great one. Teaming with the DISA hack team and the JWCC team to roll this out is build this out incrementally. So we have some initial nodes going in now. We're learning as we're doing, and then as we learn, we can expand much more rapid. But we're actually learning what it takes to deliver and operate some of these edge nodes in our classified environments.
Awesome, that's exciting. So switch gear to DevSecOps, right? You've been obviously a bit of DevSecOps in duty since the beginning when we started it. Back in the day in 2018, I think that was my first few months in the department at ANS. Why do you feel like DevSecOps is so essential we get it right?
Yeah, and I remember, when we started, you brought us that the problem is like, I want to move on with Kubernetes containers, and no one's written a STIG. So we don't even know what does a secure container look like, and we couldn't get the proof, right? So, from the early days, we were just looking like, what's the cybersecurity baseline to where we are now. So where we are now, we have made at least what I'll call the more cutting edge programs, and many in the Air Force, but now across all the MilDeps, making big investments. What's interesting is a lot of leadership is coming from the weapon system side, from the classified system side, where there's urgent need to advance, to modernize, to accelerate continued delivery. So we're seeing what I would call a growing set of programs on the front lines that are implementing DevSecOps and learning what it takes to implement and the mission value for delivery. And what we're trying to do now from the CIO perspective is, how do we, one, continue to help those folks that are on the front edge? How do we help them move faster? How do we address any policy or infrastructure roadblocks that might be getting in their way? But then how do we then extend and bring on the next set, the set of fast followers across the department? How do we enable them to move faster? So we've been working a bunch of enabling tools. We have some updated guidance coming out for DevSecOps, where we've worked with the DOT&E team to incorporate their testing guidance directly into the DevSecOps pipeline. We are continuing to work with our cybersecurity teams to define the practices for incorporating security left and right into development and into operations, and then into breaking down how those what appears to me as these functional silos that exist in the department. How do we start to really enable this cultural change that DevSecOps calls for? We can implement the technology, the tooling's there. We've defined what that tooling looks like, but now changing the processes to getting these the development teams, the security teams, and our operations teams fully integrated in a lot of complex environments that we're dealing with in the department is where we are now, and it's absolutely critical because one, we can't the threats are the cybersecurity threats are emerging too fast for us not to be able to have security fully incorporated throughout our processes, so we can respond immediately to emerging threats. We now are seeing, I think last year was 70 new CVEs per day. In that type of environment, if you're not moving fast, you're in deep trouble. But also as our on the mission side, so being able to deliver new capabilities, new software, new support in for those guys on the front edge, the front lines of the department, absolutely essential. Delivering those new capabilities like AI, as you've mentioned, getting those out there to the folks that can take advantage of it. It's where we need to be as a department, and I think that DevSecOps is one of those core enablers. If you're not building on the DevSecOps infrastructure, you're not going to be able to take advantage of these new capabilities.
Yeah, I think if you look at the timeliness and the importance of moving at a pace of relevance, I think you have no chance of success without it. So when you think of how this is going, over what now, with 2023, so it's been 5 years. Time flies, pretty
Yep.
crazy, right? If one were to tell me I met you 5 years ago, I wouldn't believe it.
No.
It's nuts. So obviously, how do you feel like the adoption of DevSecOps is going now? Some people talk about a little bit of loss of momentum, a little bit, since a lot of people left the department. What's your take on adoption?
So I think we're getting from moving from a few programs that were implementing it and getting a lot of publicity, and now what I see is the conversation is maturing across. It's not just these few programs. It's like, how do we do this at scale across the department? So we are seeing much more aggressive and larger implementations. So picking up more of the infrastructure and delivery processes than we've seen in the past. So that's starting to evolve now. We are, I think, on while the initial phase was a lot of focus on the development side of things. How do we build out CI/CD pipelines? How do we build out and incorporate security into those pipelines? The next step we're seeing from these cutting edge programs is the more seamless integration on the operations side. So not only from the defensive cyber operations that we were talking about earlier, but also from the actual production operations, right? So in industry, they run into these same silos. So SREs, so the system reliability engineering side of things, and integrating that into the DevOps approach. That's where we are. We're seeing more of those conversations now in the department, right? So, which is exciting because that means we're seeing more implementation and it getting into production more seamlessly. So folks are looking at how do we get better at tying in our warfighter user community, who are the ultimate end users, directly into our development cycles. We're looking at how do we make sure to incorporate the delivery cycles in ways that will minimize impact on military operations. So it's those are all as those challenges are coming up to us. Those are all indicators for me that we're making progress. That this is now moving from what many was oftentimes viewed as a sort of a development side of things, now in moving it into actual production and getting into much faster release cycles, and even on the weapon system side, where we have cross authorizing official as well as sort of the DevSecOps set of challenges, where you can move from the pure software environments and digital twins and model-based system engineering to now optimizing and streamlining the delivery onto the weapon system platform itself, and bringing those various AOs and reliant parties together to work on the implementation.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. That's for me, I see obviously many programs reaching out, telling me how much time they saved, moving to DevSecOps, between programs like F-35, GBSD, B-21, it saved hundreds of years of time. One question, obviously, is it really saved, or did we just not waste it? That's another debate for another day. But definitely the work, being done on DevSecOps has been growing and is also staking, which is pretty exciting as well. That leads me to the next topic, right, which is a pillar of DevSecOps with the Continuous ATO, right? Really the only way to be able to secure software while moving at a pace of development, so you're not stuck in time, with an ATO that's completely obsolete by the time you're done, doing it. So when you think of the Continuous ATO adoption, there was this memo that the DoD CISO pushed to review all the Continuous ATOs of the department, not effectively accepting reciprocity of the Air Force Continuous ATOs, so having to reissue that. That was a little bit painful. A lot of people non-concurred and were pretty upset about it.
Yep.
But some guidance was released at least, so now it's a thing. Army kind of cheated the system by calling it differently, so that way they don't have to follow the memo, right?
No, we're working
so-
with the Army, so they're not cheating. They're engaged with us. So
maybe not anymore, but they were at the time. But that's okay. I would have done the same thing. So anyway, how is it going now, and where are we in the adoption of CATOs, and is the Air Force finally pushing their stuff to DoD CISO, and what's new, I guess?
Yeah. So I'll start with the reciprocity and because moving off of DevSecOps, part of the key is these software factories, and how do we optimize those software factories across the department? And we're sort of living that life, right? So we have right now there are more programs than not that are not on a software factory. So we need to, we're still in expansionary phase for software factories, but we're also looking at, how do we optimize those investments, those resources, so take maximum utilization of those, but also enable folks to stand up effective software factories where there might be gaps in coverage. So on the reciprocity side, we had done some work on standardizing what it takes to lock down a secure container. There was work that you did with Iron Bank, which has continued. We pulled together the set of experts across the department in container technology and said, hey, listen, we need to set an agreed upon standard across the department for container security to enable a reciprocity approach. As part of that, we also have to share the body of evidence that, so if there's residual security risks, that a relying party can identify those. So that team went away and did some great work. We now have the first cut at the standard of DoD data standard for our security standard for container security. We are going to be taking that through the authorizing to the authorizing officials, and the senior risk executive is actually in the department is a council called the ISRMC. So we're trying to
That's
take.
a fun one. That's
Yeah,
a fun one.
Yeah, we're trying to take the approach here is one, now that we have the technical experts that have agreed upon what's the standard, what's it look like, we now have to bring in the other stakeholders to make sure that they understand what's addressed, that we've handled their concerns they bring to this, and we inform them about how this process works. And so we're going to be leading at the CIO that group. We have the technical standard. We'll be taking it through the AO community, through the various systems across the department, and saying, hey, we think that this is the baseline standard, that if we agree, we can enable that reciprocity and rapid adoption of a lot of the piece parts that people can use to build modern systems, to build DevSecOps pipelines, to really move that department forward. So that's one piece that's underway. On the continuous ATO itself, what you're looking at there is how seamlessly has the AO and the AO's critical staff, so the security control assessors, the information system security managers, how have those folks been integrated into the DevSecOps pipeline in a way that we can achieve continuous delivery, so that you can push the button at the end to deploy, and there's not an additional AO review because their folks and their concerns have been addressed along the way. So that's a cultural change for these teams to incorporate them as decision authorities in the pipeline process itself. So there's not bolt-on security reviews. It's driving technology change in the systems that they use for monitoring the cybersecurity and the cyber improvement. So you're looking at, modernizations of EMAS and other tools. So we're moving from more what I'll call relatively static views of a system cyber posture to much more dynamic views of the system cyber posture. And then also, it's not just the production operations view. It's the development environments, the test environments, it's the pre-production environments, and being able to build this much more comprehensive view of what's our current cyber posture for the full supply chain, from development through production. And that's a significant change. It changes operations, changes tooling, and changes processes. And so we went out to the community and said, how would the MilDeps recommend these changes? We had our ideas. We have now just completing the first assessment was through the Army and their CREATE team. So Hannah Hunt and her team were the first ones to get a package into us and said, hey, here's our approach. They have been very helpful. We've gone back over the past couple of months, back and forth, continuing conversations. We now have at least an initial draft for the body of evidence that the CIO believes would be evidentiary for a program that claims that they're operating in a real-time cyber posture awareness and response environment and achieving this notion of continuous ATO. We have that. We're going to run that through. I think the Air Force is up next. We also have a Navy package coming in. So once we have a complete view and feedback from the Army, Navy, Air Force, and the CI and the Deputy CIO for cybersecurity, we'll be able to publish the guidance. But it has been longer than I wanted, but we are very close and have a great engagement with the department teams right now.
That's pretty, that's a very big achievement. I guess, the question is always the ball to entry, right? Sometimes when you talk too much to the ISMC and other cyber guys that actually do paperwork exercises instead of actual security, they often put the ball so high that it's not reasonable to attain it. And then, when you compare to what's being done today, honestly, it's mostly paper exercise and people get away with murder. So, my fear is always, where are we setting the ball? Do you feel like when you review those kind of requirements, do you feel like this is pretty reasonable and achievable for teams?
I do. And I think part of the bar that I've demanded be set on our side is that it's more importance on the ability for them to understand where they're going and to be on a path of continuous improvement, rather than to say they have met some minimum threshold, right? So we're attempting to make sure that the teams that are coming forward with their packages, it's a greater focus on the that they understand where we need to be, that they have they've made some of those investments, that we're seeing the cybersecurity teams come together more seamlessly across the full software development lifecycle, that they have the tooling in place, that they can monitor real time their cyber posture awareness, that they have at least some level of response framework that pulls together the stakeholders if an event were to occur, that they can respond to that. But then placing a lot of importance on them living the agile DevSecOps lifestyle themselves. So that there's a platform engineering team that's responsible for continued improvements and enhancements in those cybersecurity processes as we continue to mature. This is not, it can't be a one time. It's got to be a continual improvement. And then we're engaged with other senior cybersecurity teams across the department, the folks that would be looking at the cybersecurity scorecards, looking at the EMAS from an enterprise perspective, looking at our enterprise defensive cyber capabilities, and working with these teams now to pull those live feeds. What's it mean to feed a real picture up to the enterprise defensive cyber capability? So a lot of really exciting work underway.
Yeah, no, that sounds pretty cool. And you didn't put the bar too high, which is the way to go. Otherwise, it's non-achievable, and people just are going to cut corners and do it anyways. End up on Facebook, So, let's move to Zero Trust, right? Zero Trust also a pillar of DevSecOps. I guess the first large-scale implementation of Zero Trust was the Cloud Native Access Point that we built in partnership, you and I, on the Platform One team. Now you have, Thunderdome and many other teams trying to bring, SASE and SDP and SDN stacks, whole new Zero Trust strategy released with a lot of controls to meet, with pretty well-defined goals. So when you look at that adoption, what my biggest fear, to be honest with you, is it seems that the DoD CIO is really headed to a direction where they're going to the cloud providers and telling them, hey, bring me your Zero Trust stack to meet all these 50, whatever the number is, requirements, versus having a cloud agnostic stack, which, by definition, you cannot federate Zero Trust. So what's going to be the plan to do that with all these policy enforcement points? So, when you look at that option, do you feel like we're spending enough time? And that's, kind of the beauty of the CNAP when we designed it, was cloud agnostic, not locked into one cloud provider. Do you feel like it's not essential to make sure that the Zero Trust stack of tomorrow is going to be agnostic?
No, well, so I do. I think that we want to be able to leverage both what the commercial industry can bring us, and then what does the department need to add to that. We obviously need an environment that can run across different vendors' cloud environments. So the agnostic piece of that is critical, and it's in our thinking. And I'll say that Randy Resnick and Colonel Gary Kite, that are leading our Zero Trust portfolio management office, they're engaged with me multiple times a week as we're moving forward and talking about how do we engage with the cloud. I've been actually excited about the conversations we've been having with the cloud vendors. We're not hearing them say it has to be a proprietary this vendor or that vendor solutions. We're looking at how can we leverage the tooling that they can bring into this environment, but in a way that doesn't necessarily, it's not going to lock us into one vendor or another vendor. I think the challenge, as you point out, is that the vendors can only bring so much. I'm excited about the capabilities they can bring, but we also need to work Zero Trust at all levels of the architecture. So we need to make sure that we can integrate with and transition from where our networks are today and how our networks operate to how they would operate in an SD-WAN and SASE types of environments. And that's a significant transition that we're engaged with the DISA Thunderdome team and others across the department on how that transition happens. Most of those vendors that are in those spaces are not the CSP vendors. But we wanted to approach it from a networking perspective that seamlessly integrates with our cloud environments as those mature. And then we need to get down into the application level. I think the guidance that you delivered in the Air Force that we've adopted for DoD CIO as a standard for implementing DevSecOps, where we look at things like immutability of the production environment. So the GitOps type of approach as a baseline as we move forward to identity, how we identify and containers. So it's not just people identity, it's also devices. And then at the application level, how do we identify containers? And then how do we operate those containers in a deny by default type of mode? These are all basis of zero trust. And so I think you're right. It's not just something that the cloud vendors can do. It's going to be a lot of different vendors and solutions that the department is going to have to bring forward, and then change our behavior on how we develop, field, and operate all the way down at the internals of our application environment as well.
That's you just summarized kind of everything that people worry about, and also pay attention to. What I'm going to add to that is vendors and cloud providers always going to claim or act as if they're not getting us locked in, but I would double check. Because I've seen it happen. There's very little standard when it comes to policy enforcement point and the way the PEP will behave, and so there's no federation mechanism.
Yeah, we're learning that. We're learning that there's collisions, right? And even down at the what's the tools for doing endpoint management, and how are they reporting cyber posture of a device, right? So we have different endpoint tools that we run across the department. As we move into SASE, there's different tools. Some of those tools conflict. We are trying to learn through implementation, like what works, what doesn't work. We do see some conflicts now that will be hard to overcome, as you mentioned. The ability for a policy enforcement and policy decision points distributed across the environment, the standards for how we interchange policies, how we share policy decisions, and resource cyber needs, those don't exist in any consistent way across the vendor community. So there will be some conflicts. We'll have to work with the vendors and hopefully with the standards bodies on how do we, as not just the department, but as the federal government, bring our weight that we can to push to interoperable solutions as we move forward.
Awesome. So now let's dig into supply chain, right? Because we didn't have enough important topics yet. So supply chain is obviously a huge issue both for open source and commercial commercial software. What's the plan? There's all this fanciness with the executive order from the president. Everybody talks about scanning, SBOM, all the good stuff. What's the plan?
Yeah, so we're engaged with CISA on the SBOM. I think the challenge we're facing now is that as we try to give consistent guidance to all the vendors, that brings it into a FAR and DFAR type of language that would need to be developed. So we have our acquisition teams, our DFAR council engaged with at the federal level for the federal acquisition regulations, the FAR, and with CISA. So approaching it at a federal level, what those standards look like. At the same time, we're working the standard and the formats and the implementation across the department. So we've engaged with our CDAO team, who's leading a lot of the conversations in the department now on the way ahead. We're looking at SBOMs, not just for software, but an initiative we call XBOM, because we're looking at how do we do bombs for hardware? How do we do bombs for AI? And those are all evolving. So it's I think that we have these piece parts that are falling into place. I think we're also looking at it's one thing to say in a bomb what's in that piece of software. It's also we're finding greater importance, as you mentioned here, on the supply chain. How do we raise the bar across any third party that's delivering software to the department, raise the bar within the department for implementing secure software development. And so we are engaged, and Right now, our DevSecOps guidance is aligned with the NIST Secure Software Development Framework. We give specific guidance in the department on how to incorporate security. We're now having that conversation about with both our the folks that work with the DIB and our CMMC team, as well as our internal supply chain cybersecurity groups, on how do we really approach industry to raise the bar and set some standards on attestation and confirmation of not just what's delivered, but the implementation and support for secure software development practices as we move forward.
Right. That's a big one. The timeliness of this and kind of the urgency, right? A lot of people are starting to show, malicious actors targeting DevSecOps, platforms targeting build servers, right? We've seen it, recently with SolarWinds. Do you still see the government kind of struggling between commercial and open source? I still feel like sometimes people don't realize that commercial software is 70% open source anyway.
Right. I think there's still some fear. I think that as you mentioned, it's part of it is we have greater visibility over the software. I think my position is that whether it's proprietary software or open software, it's always verify. What we have seen is, yes, open can be more secure because you can actually see the software. But as I know you've learned this as well, that someone actually has to be looking, right? There's no guarantee that actually anyone's looking at the software, even if it is open. So we are having that same discussion with the open source community, so the Linux Foundation and others on I know they're working to implement a raise the bar on secure software development practices within, and across the Linux Foundation in their software. I think we'll be expecting that as from the department's perspective, where we can work with a commercial entity that's supporting the open source software. That gives us one hook. In other environments where it's much more collaborative, no single entity, I think that as demonstrated by the work you did with the Air Force, that we need to do those deep dives. We need to make sure that those checks are being done, that we have a good idea of who's contributing to those projects. We can do our software verifications on the dependencies and libraries and make sure that those are up to date and being maintained. And that as we move forward, we have a better picture. We're not just trusting, we're actually verifying, both for proprietary and for open projects.
There we go. Are you involved with that engagement with the open source foundation and the the OpenSSF?
Yeah, I haven't been. We've been, I know it's happening. I'm supposed to be up at I think one of the Linux conferences coming up, and so I'm looking forward to making some of those connections and relationships as we move that forward. Dan Reisacker on my team is responsible for open source software policy in the department, and we do have ongoing conversations with many of the thought leaders in that, and we're looking at. And I think we're moving, from everything I've seen them brief and talk about, I think we're moving in a similar path. I think everyone recognizes the importance, especially in the threat environment we're operating in now, that if you're not addressing these concerns, then your software won't be useful.
There we go. So, next one. That one is interesting. It's personal to me because I feel the pain. We had a lot of email exchanges and topics, and I'm getting everybody and their grandmother reaching out, telling me I'm wrong, I'm right, I'm not wrong, but maybe I'm right too. Who knows? And it's so important, not just for me. I don't care because I'm gonna figure it out, and me. I mean, it's not gonna slow me down. But others that don't know me, you, all these people, to get the answers seems to be like it's a very tough thing for a startup to even understand what to do. CMMC, right? CMMC, where you have FedRAMP, right? You have an ATO you can get. right? So when you look at software accreditation, right, for startups particularly, right, you have Iron Bank trying to solve some of this, but really no one is really using reciprocity with Iron Bank. Now Iron Bank decided, actually I got a pretty heated argument with Iron Bank Platform One team actually last week, telling them if they if they cost $12 million to the taxpayer, they need to do better than accrediting 0 containers. That's pretty bad.
Well,
When I left them with 1,000. So so how do we fix it? How do we fix
yeah.
it so it's
So
accredited stuff? And how
yeah,
do
and
we scale, right?
I saw your chat with them. So I will say that I think they're doing great work, right, on Iron Bank, and what we have done. I mentioned earlier the rule set that we set in for the department on container security, and we set a baseline set of rules because many of those containers have dependencies um, that we need to notify a relying party if those dependencies start to fall out of compliance. What we're starting to see us move towards now is that, in the case of some of those containers, I think the rule was that if 2 of them fall out of critical compliance for more than 15 days, and we don't have the vendor patch for a subcomponent, then we owe it on to notify any reliant party that, one, there's this issue that is being worked, but there is a potential vulnerability that may have an impact in their environment. So those rules means that as we move forward, things are potentially going to be coming into and out of compliance and maybe compliance is the wrong term, but it's going to be very dynamic, and we need to educate.
It would be good if it was validation, right? I mean, the issue I have is twofold, right? One is all the base images are not meeting those requirements. So the so the rel image has
Yeah,
findings I can't fix, right? So I'm
yeah,
inheriting it from day one. And then the Python, the Node.js, right? All
right.
Java, right? So do I
So
build apps on top if
we'll
they
give you an
don't meet the
Alpine. We'll give you,
requirements?
if you don't want Ubi, we'll give you Alpine. But I expect the Red Hat team will have those patched quick, right? That we'll have
I
those.
hope so.
Yeah,
But the way we used to do it, right, is we used to approve the base images and approve the risk, because the fact is you can't fix it as a
yeah.
vendor for the startup level, right? And the startup would only
Well,
have to worry about the stuff they bring on top. That seems
well,
to
what we
be
found, and so part of what we found is that because so um, you are accepting that risk for the systems that you are accountable for. But if we're trying to get to reciprocity, we have to be able to share that risk notice because someone else might have a different risk posture. And so what we're getting to now, and the story that we'll be taking up to the ISRMC really says, hey guys, here's how we're going to be managing the real-time security of these and the compliance of these different components. And here's how we'll notify you if something's in and out of compliance. And here's how we can coordinate on response actions in a much more dynamic way. Because if something's buried within their environment, hopefully the SBOM they'll know that it's even in this container.
right.
We want to get ahead of that and actually have the notification and alerting mechanisms built in place in real time so that, one, we can identify that there's a vulnerability. Hopefully, we're working also with CISA. We're very interested in the VEX standard, which will give us the not just the SBOM, or it'll enable the vulnerabilities from a CVE, but be able to describe whether that vulnerability is exploitable in a
Right.
standard, consistent way.
Right.
So that's
Because
evolving.
none of the ones on UBIO, by the way.
Yeah, so if we had VEX today, we could have had a report that comes along and says, hey, this vulnerability is there, it's being addressed, and right now it's not exploitable, right? It's contained or
But
lower
in the
level.
meantime, you have 1,200 or whatever
Yep,
containers marked non-compliant. That
right.
can't be the answer, right? I
Well,
mean, that's
so
just.
maybe compliance is wrong, but we think it's very important to make sure that relying parties understand exactly where we
I
stand.
mean,
And
displaying the risk, I have no problem with it, right? But when
right,
look, the story is pretty funny, right? Because my base images use distroless and at 0 findings, right?
yeah,
I swapped to the approved
oh,
Python image for my
this,
container, and now I have a bunch, and now I'm
yeah,
marked non-compliant because I swapped to the image. That's the only one I can use for Python, right?
well,
It's
yeah.
almost
So, but
you
this is
imagine
part of
companies now they have the label. I mean, you have to think
right.
also the impact on the brand, right? To be marked non-compliant on the
So
website.
yeah, so compliant might be the non-compliant and non-compliant might be the wrong terminology. It's what we had, and what we mean is there is, like a container for folks, is embedding subcomponents and sublibraries, and if those um, fall out have vulnerabilities against them, we feel it's very important for us to communicate that up.
No, 100%,
How we move,
100%.
and support this. I think this is, the issue you're bringing up now is part of this culture change, right? How do we, the ways that we used to think about compliance, it was you're compliant for, several years. And now we're thinking about, you might be compliant one day, and then,
not compliant the other.
then we find this, sub CVE or something pops, and then you're not compliant until you're patched. And so you're coming in.
But in this case, the vendor is provided the base image by the government, right? So this is, that's the only option I have, right?
Right. So, but realize.
And I have my own, by the way, I have my own other image, but I can't use it because it's not approved by DoD because, chain guard containers are not approved by Iron Bank yet.
Yeah. Well, so, yeah. And so part of what we need to get folks to understand is that the existence of a vulnerability, we find people that think that a vulnerability means it is exploitable, and when we
and that's the thing though, right? But we know it's not. So why don't they mock? I mean, look, at the end of the day, we know it's not an exploitable one. Yeah. And now all of the containers, I mean, I can tell you, if I was in P1 right now, right, still the CSO in the Air Force, I would tell them, look, the CV is not exploitable. We mark it as approved because there's no risk and there's no fix for it. Right.
Well, so yeah, so this is just part of our communication strategy. We saw the conversation you were having with the Iron Bank team and the Platform One team. I've engaged with them. We're trying to learn these lessons and how do we better communicate? What's the methods and what's the rule set?
Look, at the end of the day, we cannot forget the mission of Iron Bank, right? Which is accelerating the adoption of open source and commercial products in the department. Right.
And we think critical to that reciprocity, as I mentioned, is making sure that relying parties understand.
100%. And by the way, I'm not opposed. I have no problem disclosing the finding. We always had the findings as a package, but there's a difference also with the government providing a base image to vendors to use, which is work. By the way, the vendors have to work, right, to swap images so they can hopefully be approved to be selling products in DoD to accelerate their adoption in the department, and now you're doing the opposite. I mean, you're marking them non-compliant.
No, in this case, we had 2 CVEs ping against the base image, right? And so,
which is provided by the government to the vendors.
Well, the vendor is maintaining that as well, right? But as you build,
but it's a different one. It's a real, it's a different vendor, right? So for me, I'm showing up with a Python image, which by the way is probably the most common, right?
I'm aware.
So like not having a Python approved image meeting your own requirements is when you spend 12 million a year, when they spend 12 million a year on this, and they spend 12 million a year on this, and they don't have an approved Python container.
No,
that cannot be seen as a win. That just cannot, that just, I mean, come on. It's 12 million bucks a year.
I'm going to get kicked out of here soon, but I will say we do have this rule set that we're trying to establish across the AO and the CISO community on how we do these alerts. I think the language of compliant and non-compliant is a little cumbersome given the way that
that's right. That's right. I think that's the fix, by the way, right? I think you fix the language and you fix the problem,
And I think
for a company being marked non-compliant is a big deal, right?
Right.
It's like, you spend time and money and know you're marked non-compliant.
Yeah,
and you did everything you could.
This is where we need to be, right? This is where how we need to move. We need to our defensive cyber folks, our AO teams, our CISO teams, working in this the speed of change that we're facing now, and the speed of emerging threats is changing how we've operated, and we're trying to adapt from this new model to the old way, some of the old terms and thinking. And it's going to be clunky, but these are the areas that we need to invest in. I mean, this is, I think, a great example of how cyber response actions need to be coordinated moving forward, and how we need to get to a better baseline of understanding and communicate. We had that question earlier about definitions. I think that we're going to continue to find that as we try to transform from where we are to where we need to be.
Right. All right, last question. I know we're out of time,
Yeah.
but I have to ask you that one, right? So obviously,
Yeah.
AI, GPT, big disruption. What do you think is happening in the software world?
No, I think this one is, really exciting on where it goes. We're finding some of the limitations that we have today, right? So we were in my team,
Hallucinations, fake
yeah,
stuff,
right.
fake APIs.
It would make things up. Yeah, right. Exactly.
He would make up an API that doesn't exist.
Yeah, right. So we were saying, hey, go.
But it looks pretty good, and then he could almost code it for you, and then give it back to the vendor.
Right. So if we could get past that, I mean, the ability for it to write document code, to check code, to optimize code, and how about tying it in as an interface for users, right? So you can now you could have a much more responsive, help desk feature that's like amazing. So I think how these technologies are going to be game changers. I think there's if we can get past some of these things like the hallucinations and some other things, I'm excited about where this.
It's getting better. GPT-4 is already,
Yeah.
I mean, it's not perfect, but it's getting better.
No, it's really.
You have to trust but verify. People shouldn't just run with it, right? It's like check if the API exists.
Right.
But in a sense, you're asking a biased question and you're getting a biased answer too, right? Because sometimes how you phrase it is like, oh, give me the API for this.
Yeah.
Well, the API doesn't exist. You didn't ask if it existed. You asked to give it to you. So it's always interesting. Choice of words.
We'll have prompt engineers as a new job skill. Right.
Yeah, no doubt. Right. All right. So, you have the potting words for this. So, we're not.
What I should say, right, is that being here at the software development and the secure supply chain, as we've been talking, keeps me up at night, and that is a concern. The threats are emerging fast. Talking about ChatGPT and those, the advantages, and sitting here with my son and looking at colleges. I'm also worried about those tools and how they could be used unethically for influence ops and other things, right? I think that my experience with my son and his and his older daughters, that we're not training folks on how to be aware of what technology can do and its challenges and limitations, and having in place, here's how to use these tools, right? The teenagers are going around and don't understand that they might be being manipulated behind the scenes, the impact of sharing all of their data. I see it with my kids, and so we need to inform them. I'm also worried about the education we're doing for folks, for younger kids. My son signed up for a beginning computer science class, and he had to withdraw. The professor, God bless him, was from MIT and was told the students that he was going to teach it as a MIT weed out class. And so within week one, my son has never been on a compiler, and he's already being taught advanced software concepts, go write programs, so implement advanced object-oriented thing. Right? Like he was completely lost. And so we need, that's the wrong approach. We need not just the next generation, but our generation as well, to be familiar with software and these tools and AI and the impacts and the dangers, right? And to realize how they might be being used against them. But anyway, we'll crawl.
No doubt. Yeah. No doubt. Well, first, wanted to thank you. I know you're on vacation, so thanks for being here. We're lucky to have you in the department. You achieved a lot already, and you're going to do more, because you're going to stay a very long time, because we need you for at least 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So don't go anywhere. Thanks for the time. Lots of people, lots of questions. That's okay. We couldn't do all of it, but you gave us plenty of time. And stay safe, everybody. We'll see you in 2 weeks. No show next week. So 2 weeks We'll see you next 2 weeks from now, Tuesday, 1 p.m. And in the meantime, you better keep up the good work so our kids have a fighting chance at winning against China 20 years from now. Stay safe. Bye-bye.
Okay. Thanks, Nick.